The storm hit the Pacific Coast Research Station without warning, turning the usually calm October night into chaos. Marcus Webb pressed his face against the laboratory window, watching 20-foot waves crash against the rocky shore below. The lead marine biologist, he'd seen plenty of rough weather. But this felt different, more intense, almost supernatural. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the churning waters, and that's when Marcus saw her. A figure was struggling in the violent surf, being pulled toward the jagged rocks that had claimed countless ships over the centuries. The rain soaked through his clothes instantly, but he pressed forward, driven by an instinct he couldn't explain. "Hold on," he shouted over the howling wind, though he doubted anyone could hear him above the storm's fury as he reached the water's edge. A massive wave deposited the figure onto the sandy beach. Marcus rushed forward, expecting to find a shipwreck survivor. But what he discovered defied everything he knew about marine biology. She was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, with long silver blue hair that seemed to shimmer even in the darkness. But where her legs should have been, a magnificent tail stretched across the sand scales that shifted from deep emerald to pearl white in the lightning's glow. A mermaid. An actual mermaid. Her eyes opened vast and blue-green like the deepest ocean, and fixed on Marcus with an intelligence that made his breath catch. When she spoke, her voice carried the sound of waves on distant shores. "You saved me," she whispered, reaching out to touch his face, with fingers webbed delicately like a seabird's. "I am Narita," Marcus managed to reply, kneeling beside her in the wet sand. "Are you hurt?" "The storm." "It was not natural," she said, struggling to sit up. "Dark forces in my realm created it to hide their movements. I was trying to warn the surface dwellers, but I was caught in the tempest." Marcus helped support her, amazed at how warm her skin felt despite the cold water. "Warn us about what?" Before she could answer, another wave crashed nearby and Narita's expression grew urgent. "I must return before they discover I'm missing." "But Marcus," she pressed something smooth and warm into his palm. "This is not goodbye." The object was a shell unlike any he'd seen in 20 years of marine research, opalescent and pulsing with a soft inner light. When he looked up to ask about it, Narita was already sliding back toward the waves. "Wait!" Marcus called, but she was gone. Disappeared beneath the dark waters as if she'd never existed, standing alone on the beach. Holding the mysterious shell, Marcus wondered if the storm had driven him to hallucination. But the warmth spreading from the shell through his entire body told him otherwise. His life as a rational scientist had just been turned completely upside down. The luminescent shell became Marcus's secret obsession. During the day, he tucked it safely in his desk drawer, but at night, alone in his apartment overlooking the harbor, he would hold it and watch its soft glow pulse like a heartbeat. A rational part of his mind insisted he'd imagined the entire encounter, but the shell's impossible radiance proved otherwise. His work at the research station suffered. Dr. Patricia Vance, the station director, noticed his distraction during their weekly marine ecosystem reports. "Marcus, your latest findings on kelp forest regeneration are usually impeccable, but these charts look like they were done by an intern," she said, tapping her pen against his incomplete data. "Sorry, Pat. Just tired, I guess," Marcus replied. Though fatigue wasn't the problem, every moment spent cataloging ordinary. See, life felt meaningless when he knew extraordinary beings existed beneath the waves. His girlfriend. Jade started asking questions too. They'd been together for 3 years, sharing a comfortable routine of weekend beach walks and quiet dinners. But now Marcus found himself staring at the ocean instead of listening to her talk about her job at the bank. "You've been different since that big storm," Jade said one evening as they sat on his couch. "Distant? Are you having second thoughts about us moving in together?" Marcus looked at her sweet, practical Jade, with her sensible brown hair and honest brown eyes, and felt a stab of guilt. She deserved better than a boyfriend who'd fallen under the spell of a mythical sea creature. "It's not about us," he said, which was both true and a lie. "Just work stress." But Jade wasn't convinced. She'd known him too long to buy his excuses. Their relationship began to feel like it was drowning in unspoken secrets. Marcus threw himself into research, but not the kind his job required. He spent hours in the station's library, poring over maritime folklore and ancient texts about ocean spirits. He discovered stories from cultures around the world, tales of merpeople who could control storms, communicate with sea life, and form deep bonds with humans. Most accounts dismiss these as sailors' superstitions, but Marcus found patterns that suggested something more. Reports of unusual weather phenomena often coincided with sightings of mysterious figures in the water. Several coastal communities had legends about storm dancers who appeared before great ocean changes. Late one night, while analyzing satellite weather data, Marcus noticed something odd. The storm that brought Narita had indeed been unnatural, forming too quickly and moving in patterns that defied meteorological models. Whatever she'd warned him about, it was real. The shell pulsed brighter that night. Marcus felt a strange pulling sensation in his chest. He walked to his balcony overlooking the harbor and held the shell up to the moonlight. For just a moment, he thought he saw a figure in the distant waves. But when he grabbed his binoculars, there was nothing there. 3 months passed this way, Marcus. Caught between two worlds, unable to return to his old life, but unable to reach the new one that called to him. His relationship with Jade deteriorated further, and his work performance continued to decline. Dr. Vance scheduled a meeting to discuss his recent struggles. "Maybe you need a vacation," she suggested. "When's the last time you took time off?" Marcus almost laughed. How could he explain that what he needed wasn't rest, but answers? How do you tell your boss that you're waiting for a mermaid to return and explain the mysteries of the deep? That night, holding the shell as it glowed with unusual intensity, Marcus made a decision. If Narita wouldn't come to him, perhaps it was time to go looking for her. 2 years had passed since that storm-tossed night, and Marcus had built a new kind of peace. He'd ended things with Jade. She deserved honesty he couldn't give on thrown himself into. Legitimate marine research with renewed focus. Dr. Vance praised his groundbreaking work on deep-sea communication patterns, never knowing it was inspired by his search for something far more extraordinary than whale songs. The shell still glowed each night, a constant reminder of magic in his mundane world. Marcus had stopped obsessively scanning the waves, but he never stopped hoping. The Tuesday evening felt different from the moment he arrived at the lab. The ocean was unusually calm, and the research station's dolphins were behaving strangely, clicking and whistling in patterns Marcus had never recorded before. He was downloading data from the underwater sensors when every piece of equipment simultaneously went haywire. Computer screens flickered with impossible readings. The sonar showed massive shapes moving beneath the surface, shapes too large and too organized to be whales. Then, just as suddenly, everything returned to normal. Marcus stepped outside to check the external sensors and felt his heart stop. Narita was rising from the harbor, water cascading from her silver-blue hair as she lifted herself gracefully onto the research dock. But she wasn't alone. In her arms was a small child, perhaps 2 years old, who moved with fluid, otherworldly grace. "Marcus," Narita said, and her voice carried the same musical quality that had haunted his dreams. "I told you this wasn't goodbye." The child turned to look at Marcus. He saw his own green eyes staring back at him from a face that held Narita's ethereal beauty. The little one had legs like a human child, but when she moved, Marcus caught glimpses of translucent webbing between her fingers. "This is Marina," Narita said, her expression mixing joy with deep worry. "Your daughter." Marcus felt the world tilt. He'd imagined this possibility in his wildest dreams, but hearing it confirmed was overwhelming. "How is that? How long? Time flows differently in the deep realms," Narita explained, moving closer to the dock's edge. "What was one night for you was much longer in my world." Marina has been asking about her father for months. The little girl Marina studied Marcus with unsettling intelligence. When she spoke, her voice carried both the musical quality of her mother's speech and distinctly human inflection. "Papa," she said simply, then added, "The fishies told me you were here." "She can communicate with sea life," Narita said, pride and concern warring in her voice. "Watch." Marina pointed toward the harbor, and within moments, a pod of dolphins surfaced, clicking and whistling in obvious greeting. She clicked back, and they responded as if carrying on a conversation. "That's impossible," Marcus whispered. "She can also breathe underwater and sense emotional currents in both our species," Narita continued. "But these gifts make her dangerous. To some, and precious to others. We're not safe in my realm anymore." "What do you mean, not safe?" Narita's expression darkened. "The Deep Court has learned of Marina's existence. They consider her an abomination, a mixing of bloodlines that threatens their ancient laws. Their leader, Tempest, has declared her a threat to the natural order." Marina suddenly tensed, her small head tilting as if listening to something only she could hear. "Mama," she whispered urgently, "the angry ones are coming. Their thoughts taste like bitter kelp." Narita paled, quickly lifting Marina higher onto the dock. "Marcus, I need you to understand they won't stop hunting her. And now that they know about you, you're in danger too. Marina needs both her parents. Needs to learn to live in your world as well as mine." "You're asking me to help raise her," Marcus said, the enormity of the situation sinking in. "I'm asking you to help save her," Narita replied. "Because what's coming from the depths will change everything for both our species." As if summoned by her words, the calm harbor began to churn ominously, and Marcus realized their reunion was about to become something much more dangerous. The water in the harbor turned black as ink, spreading outward from the deep channel like spilled oil. Marcus grabbed Marina, surprised by how natural it felt to hold his daughter. While Narita's tail shifted nervously in the shallows, "They've found us," she whispered. "Tempest's hunters move through the shadow currents." "Who exactly are we dealing with?" Marcus asked, backing away from the water's edge as the darkness crept closer to shore. "The Deep Court rules the oldest parts of the ocean," Narita explained quickly. "They've kept our people hidden from surface dwellers for millennia. Tempest leads their military force, the Abyssal Guard. They see Marina as proof that I've violated our most sacred laws." Marina pressed closer to Marcus, her small hands gripping his shirt. "Papa, they smell like the places where nothing grows, dark and cold and angry." The harbor's darkness suddenly exploded upward, forming 3 towering waterspouts. From each spout emerged figures that made Marcus's scientific mind real humanoid beings with scales that seemed to absorb light, elongated limbs ending in razor-sharp claws, and eyes like bioluminescent predators from the deepest trenches. The largest figure had a crown of coral and bone woven into flowing black hair. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of crushing depths. "Narita of the Silver Tide," Tempest called out, "turn the aberration to face judgment for crimes against the natural order." "She's done nothing wrong," Narita replied, her own voice taking on harmonics that made the water around her glow. "Marina is innocent. Innocence is irrelevant," Tempest snarled. "She is proof of forbidden contact with surface dwellers. The contamination spreads already, can sense the male carries traces of deep magic." Marcus looked down at the shell in his pocket, which was now burning hot against his skin. "What does he mean, contamination?" "The bond between us," Narita said softly. "It changed you, just as it changed me. That's why you could see me that first night when others would have seen only storm foam." Marina suddenly wriggled out of Marcus's arms and stepped toward the water. "Stop hurting Mama," she said to Tempest, her young voice carrying surprising authority. The dolphins in the harbor began clicking urgently, and every piece of electronic equipment on the research station started humming with power. Tempest's expression shifted from contempt to something like fear. "The child commands both realms. She is more dangerous than we calculated, which is exactly why we have to leave," Narita said urgently to Marcus. Now, but as they started to run toward the station, more waterspouts erupted around the harbor's perimeter. They were surrounded. "There's an old smuggler's cave system beneath the research station," Marcus said, thinking fast. "It connects to underwater. Channels that lead out to open ocean. Can you navigate those?" "Yes, but Marcus, once we go into the deep water together, there's no going back to your old life. The Deep Court will never stop hunting us." Marcus looked at his daughter, this impossible, beautiful child who could speak to sea creatures and command technology, then at Narita, the being who had changed his understanding of what was possible in the world. "Then we'd better find somewhere safe to make a new one," he said, as they descended into the cave system. Marcus could hear Tempest's enraged roar echoing across the water. Behind them, the research station's lights flickered and died as the Abyssal Guard took their fury out on his former workplace. Marina took both their hands as they waded deeper into the flooded caves. "Don't worry, Papa," she said, with confidence that seemed far beyond her years. "I know where the safe people live, the ones like me who sing to both the fish and the stars." Marcus realized they weren't just fleeing, they were heading toward others who had walked this impossible path between two worlds. Whatever lay ahead would test everything he thought he knew about family, sacrifice, and the hidden depths of love. The underwater sanctuary took Marcus's breath away literally and figuratively. Located in a massive air-filled cavern system 50 feet below the ocean floor, it housed nearly 24 families like his own. Hybrid children played in tidal pools while their human and mer parents worked together to maintain this hidden haven. "Welcome to Haven's Deep," said Finn, a weathered man whose wife Coral had scales that shifted from blue to silver depending on her mood. "We've been expecting you." Word travels fast through the current networks. Marina immediately ran to play with the other hybrid children, her earlier fear forgotten, as she found others who understood her unique gifts. Marcus watched in amazement as she and a boy named Derek worked together to make bioluminescent algae dance in patterns while communicating with a school of fish simultaneously. "How long have you been hiding here?" Marcus asked. Coral replied, her musical voice tinged with sadness. "Ever since Tempest took control of the Deep Court and began his purges, there are dozens of sanctuaries like this around the world, but he's been finding them one by one." Narita emerged from the deeper pools, her expression grim. "The scouts report Tempest's forces are gathering above us. He's brought the full Abyssal Guard, nearly 50 warriors, plus their Storm Riders." "Storm Riders?" Marcus asked. "Creatures that can control weather and water pressure," Finn explained. "They'll try to collapse our sanctuary or flood the air chambers. We've reinforced against both, but there are limits to what engineering can do against elemental magic." As if summoned by his words, the cavern shuddered, and water began seeping through cracks in the ceiling. The hybrid children clustered together, their combined abilities creating a protective barrier of light and warmth. "We can't keep running," said Narita, looking at the families around them. "Every sanctuary Tempest destroys takes innocence with it. This has to end." Marina walked over to Marcus and took his hand. At 2 years old, she somehow radiated the wisdom of someone much older. "Papa, the angry ones are afraid because they don't understand. They think mixing makes weakness, but it makes strength." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Marina said simply. She raised her free hand, and every piece of abandoned human technology in the cavern, old sonar equipment, depth sensors, communication devices, suddenly sparked to life. Simultaneously, the merfolk's bioluminescent abilities intensified, and the water began to sing with harmonics that Marcus felt in his bones. "She's creating a bridge," Coral whispered in amazement, "between technological and magical systems." The cavern's shaking stopped abruptly. Through the water-filled tunnel that served as their main exit, they could see lights approaching Tempest and his forces descending toward the sanctuary. "Let them come," Marina said, with startling determination. "It's time to show them what love makes possible." As the Abyssal Guard entered the cavern's outer chambers, they found themselves facing something unprecedented. Human technology enhanced by mer magic, creating defenses and communication systems beyond either species. Individual capabilities. The hybrid children, working in concert, projected their thoughts and emotions outward, not as weapons, but as understanding. For the first time in centuries, the Deep Court warriors experienced human emotions directly: love for family, protective instincts, the joy of discovery, the hope for a better future. Tempest himself staggered as Marina's pure, unconditional love washed over him. "This is impossible," he gasped, his rage flickering like a candle in strong wind. "Not impossible," Narita said, swimming forward with Marcus and Marina beside her. "Just new. Evolution doesn't ask permission, Tempest. it simply becomes. The battle that should have destroyed Haven's Deep became something else entirely, a demonstration of what was possible when barriers dissolved and different ways of being found common ground. Several of Tempest's warriors laid down their weapons, overwhelmed by the emotional connections the children had forged. In the end, Tempest himself was changed. Feeling the genuine love between Marcus and Nerita, witnessing Marina's bridge between worlds, he made a choice that surprised everyone, including himself. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "the Deep Court has been too rigid in its interpretation of natural law." 3 months later, Marcus stood on a beach that didn't exist on any human map, watching Marina teach a group of young merfolk how to operate solar-powered communication devices while they showed her traditional deep current navigation. The first official cultural exchange between species was taking place in the shallows where two worlds met. Nerita wrapped her arms around him from behind, her touch still sending electricity through his entire being. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Leaving your old life behind?" Marcus looked at their daughter, who was currently having an animated conversation with a dolphin while adjusting a waterproof tablet. "How could I regret finding my family?" The future stretched ahead of them, full of challenges as to species. Learn to coexist, but with Marina and the other hybrid children as bridges between worlds. Marcus believed they could build something beautiful from the depths of difference. After all, the deepest connections often begin with the most impossible encounters.